Thank you, President. I will be brief. Anti-discrimination laws are difficult for libertarians. Some people have gone so far as to describe it as a hole in the philosophy. We support the rights of individuals to make their own decisions, and we oppose the use of government coercion against individuals making decisions for themselves. As a pretty mediocre defender of rights said a few years ago, people have a right to be bigots. But that can lead to some ugly places. In communities where bigotry is widespread, being the subject of that bigotry can be very hard. Everyone's minds turn to the American South and the civil rights struggles in the 60s. But of course, there have been many, many examples of discrimination based on race or sexuality in Australian history as well. If there is a widespread and entrenched discrimination against a minority group, it becomes harder to defend a lack of intervention to change things. It is not uncommon to see MPs celebrating their records as human rights champions. It's generally hypocritical. Often those same MPs publicly opposed those positions only a few years earlier. Governments rarely lead public opinion in these matters. They follow. They more commonly wait for activists and time to do their work for them, and only after a significant chunk of the population have already adopted these positions do they dart in, grab up the flag, and push their way to the front of the movement, waving the banner triumphantly. And this is significant because we should be realistic about government motivation to enact anti-discrimination legislation. It is primarily to win votes, not to protect minorities. That may be a little cynical. No doubt there are always some true believers acting for what they believe to be the public good. But I maintain our major parties in Australia are made up predominantly of cynical, vote-chasing politicians, not true believers. Let me set out what I believe. Governments should never discriminate. Individuals and private organisations should be allowed to, but I have no problem with the use of social pressure to shame the bigots. You absolutely shouldn't be forced to bake that cake at gunpoint, but you probably should just bake the damn cake anyway. If you don't, you're probably a bad person. It gets harder when we talk about organisations that take taxpayer money. Should they be allowed to discriminate against the people who contribute to funding them? Doesn't government funding justify government action against bigots? There is a good case for it. But then, as governments have grown, swallowing down more and more taxpayer money and extending tentacles into every aspect of society, there are less and less organisations that do not receive government funding. The libertarian solution here is to tax less and fund less and let private organisations make their own decisions. It's significant that legislation like this was not proposed in the years when religious organisations were powerful within our society. In fact, we saw the opposite. Churches using their power to pass laws to enforce their morality on all of us. In those days, I would have opposed the Walesers and the morality police in their attempts to control us. But that is not the society we live in today. The devout religious groups make up only a small minority in today's Victoria. And perhaps they now need protection. We might be tempted to say that it serves them right, that the shoe is on the other foot, and that they can swallow their own medicine. Ironically, however, I believe that many of those who in the past would have joined churches and advocated for enforcing religious morality now join activist groups and crusade to enforce their woke morality on everyone else. Same moral fervour, same intolerance of their opposition. So, tolerance should extend to those who do not share our views. If a business does not want to serve you, why would you want to give them your money? Go somewhere that accepts you and send the bigots broke. Get your cake from someone who will celebrate with you. There is a large marketplace for religious views out there. If a church has an issue with someone's sexuality or gender identity or some other characteristic, people should vote with their feet and move to a church that is more accepting. If a religious school rejects you for who you are, why would you want to work for them? Move on. Find somewhere better that likes you for you. I am more disturbed by the idea of schools ejecting students who have been there for years if they discover a sexuality or gender identity that does not fit. But even there, it would seem like the best for the child involved to go somewhere they are accepted than to try and enforce the official approved state philosophy on those that do not want it. I see bills like this as an attempt to force all of society into a particular mould, the views held by the current moral enforcers. I believe it is overreach, intrusion of the state into areas that it should not intrude into. So I will oppose this on principle. So let me put it on the record that I'm not a fan of churches that discriminate against people of a particular sexuality or gender identity. There are many views expressed in religious books that have been quietly swept under the carpet by believers in even the most conservative Christian churches. I believe this form of discrimination could also be safely swept under the carpet with them, as many mainstream churches have done. But it's not my job to dictate other people's beliefs. So I will stand up for people's right to believe things I do not approve of and act in ways I do not like. And I encourage people to make their own opinions known to others with their dollars and their feet, rather than with heavy-handed state legislation. I do not like philosophy enforced at the end of a gun, as ultimately all government laws are. I can't let this pass without a reference to this government's discrimination against the unvaccinated. Not for scientific or medical reasons, but for political and individual goals. Some truly shameful acts have taken place under the mantle of the pandemic powers, and they continue apace, and apparently will extend into next year. Perhaps this government should look first at what's stuck in its own eye before conducting their campaign against the faults of others.